Hi, I'm Mick and this is Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad, and welcome to Sunday's edition of the DCEU Daily. Today we're going to compare the DCEU with Arrowverse. In some terms, Arrowverse and the DCEU couldn't be more polar opposites, but also there's elements that are quite similar. What do you mean, Mick? Well, isn't it interesting that Man of Steel and BVS were trashed for being too dark? Well, let's look at the Arrowverse's first entry, Arrow. This is an adaptation of the Green Arrow comics, but not a very faithful one. There is no Star City. At first, it's called Starling City. And this Green Arrow isn't the light, fluffy Green Arrow from the early 1960s comics. This is a Green Arrow who murders people. How interesting is that? Do you remember in Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice, when people were angry because Batman was murdering people? Well, in the first two seasons, or at least the first season of Arrow, Green Arrow, aka Oliver Queen, was murdering villains. But not just that. He would cock his bow and say, "You failed this city." Now, personally, not being an avid reader of the Green Arrow comics, it didn't really bother me. But isn't it interesting? It didn't seem to bother many Green Arrow fans either. There was no histrionics like there was to the reaction of the DCEU. Oliver Queen, in the comics, a light, fluffy character with an arrow cape and a boxing glove arrow. An absolutely silly, fun character in the comics, in live action was adapted to murder villains, to be on a revenge mission. And no one uttered a negative utterance. Isn't that interesting how people pick and choose when they're angry about adaptations being changed? Now, Greg Berlanti is actually a very clever man. Now, a lot of people, in DC fandom don't like Greg, but actually he's a very clever man because he started the franchise so dark and so compelling. But then he lightens things up with The Flash. Then he lightens things up even more with Legends of Tomorrow, and then even more with Supergirl. And then Black Lightning's a little bit darker, a little bit more interesting. Very sad they cancelled that show. It must have had something to do with ratings, because that's one of my favourite Arrowverse shows. I don't follow Arrowverse so much now because it's not really for me, it's not really made for me, but I am a DC fan. And I must say this, I do like what they've done with Arrowverse. Not in terms of, the way it's been overly lightened up and made a lot sillier than it used to be. The fact that this is a more cohesive, connective universe than the DC Extended Universe has ever been. So it's interesting because there are many comparisons to be drawn in Arrowverse to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we can look at that. Very, very similar. The MCU never started off dark. It stayed with the same tone. And because that tone worked from the moment they got into the first Avengers movie, Avengers Ensemble, they stuck with a winning formula. But Arrowverse didn't do that. It started so dark. But what's the difference? Greg Berlanti was always going to evolve his Green Arrow to the hero of the story. And we see, at the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths, probably one of the best superhero crossovers in live action history, and it at least equals what they did in Infinity War and Avengers Endgame for a lot lesser of the budget. Ultimately, Oliver Queen becomes the multiverse hero and saves the day. And then the multiverse is rebooted, and it is where we are now with Earth Prime. Also, a lot of people say Arrowverse hasn't been that good since Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like people say that, the MCU's over since Avengers Endgame. Neither are over. And get ready for some exciting crossover potential with the season finale of Superman and Lois. The reason they weren't doing crossovers really, and I know we had the first 5 episodes of Flash, but because of COVID they had problems because it's difficult to cross over different productions. So even though people criticize Arrowverse and people laugh at its ratings, the CW's ratings potential has never been that high. And even when we changed from the WB to the CW, even Smallville saw a hit going down in ratings because of the ratings capacity of the CW. I don't really understand how it works. So, Greg Berlanti's plan was to start his lead franchise hero, Oliver Queen, as a dark, uncompromising character out for revenge. But by the time we got to Crisis on Infinite Earths, he became a more evolved man. He learned from his mistakes. He became a hero. He met his daughter. He became a better person. This is interesting. Let's look. Let's take this back to the DCEU and Superman and Batman. Superman is a little bit more broodier and moodier in Man of Steel, and even worse in Batman vs. Superman. And in Batman vs. Superman, they introduce a Batman that kills, who hates Superman and actually is planning to murder Superman because he's lost so much, because his Dick Grayson was taken away, his adopted son. There are reasons. But isn't it ironic that just like Berlanti, Snyder planned to evolve both his Superman and Batman? We saw it in the Snyder Cut. Batman is not the Batman of BVS. In the Snyder Cut, he now has faith and believes Superman will return to join the brand new Justice League he's set up. So, both characters that started off dark in 2 different franchises always planned to evolve their characters. So, why do people still have issues with what Snyder did in MOS, but especially in BVS? Zack Snyder is a revolutionary storyteller. There's no question about that. But unlike Berlanti, he doesn't have the tools, or he can't be bothered to explain what he's doing. And so a lot of the stuff, when we started to understand Zack's plans, and a lot of his fans who go onto Twitter only understand his plan because he told us on Vera. And there lies the problem. Greg Berlanti and Todd Helbing and all the other Arrowverse showrunners never had to explain what was going on with Oliver Queen. Already by the end of season 2 of Arrow, he had been inspired by Felicity, and he learned a lesson that he shouldn't be killing, and he evolves as a better man. Deathstroke murders his mother in front of him and his sister Faya, and he could have murdered him, but he becomes better by not murdering him. Now, in reality, if he did that in front of my mum, I don't think I could be that controlled and more evolved. But we're not talking about reality here. We're talking about make-believe. Let's pretend. Let's always remember that. So really, the stark differences between how Snyder and the DCEU started and Arrowverse started, there was narrative explanations. It was simply done in Arrowverse. You could see how chapterized it was and how blatantly they were trying to evolve their Green Arrow. For fuck's sake, it's called Arrowverse for a reason. It's named after Green Arrow. Green Arrow goes out a hero. He's now, the hero of Earth Prime. There would not be an Earth Prime if it wasn't for Oliver Queen. He literally is the Tony Stark of that universe. Like Tony evolves as Iron Man and as a man. In the first Iron Man, he's selling weapons, he's drinking, sleeping with women, not treating women so good. But in the end of the first movie, he comes out and says, I'm Iron Man. He pretty much, I can't remember now, but I think Pepper knows that he loves her by the end of the movie, right? He evolves to a better man. So all 3 franchises try to evolve, in a way, the toxic males that they had in the first kind of story. Because life gets to you. Whether you're a woman, a man, or however you identify as, life makes us toxic. But we can evolve. How do we evolve in life? By meeting new people that are more intelligent than us, and they can educate us. So this is what happened in Arrowverse and with Iron Man in the MCU. And the same thing was going to happen with Batman and Superman. Ultimately, in Justice League 3, Henry Cavill's Superman leading the people of the world, metahumans, people, everyone was going to be the Justice League. What a great message that is. And the only problem was with Snyder, he had a reputation for deconstruction going back to Watchmen. Watchmen was always a deconstructive story anyway. But a lot of the Watchmen fans didn't like what Snyder did in certain places. He got a reputation. Because when he was doing 300 and Dawn of the Dead, the mainstream audience fucking loved him. But it was Watchmen and what he did with it. Now, I love Watchmen. Probably because I haven't read the comics. Again, I'm not a reader, I'm not a comic book person. I'm a fan of live action DC. And this is where I come from, and this is what motivated me to start this channel, of course. So you've got the MCU, you've got Arrowverse, who explained what they were doing via their narrative. Snyder explained it via a social media platform. And that's the difference. And this is why the audience turned away from the DCEU. It's not that Snyder didn't make great comic book movies and he didn't have a great idea. He lacks the capacity to explain what he's doing via his narrative. So I think it's ironic. So today's video really was about me showing you the irony of Arrowverse starting off with Green Arrow, taking the green off of the name, calling him Arrow, darkening him up. The pilot episode of Green Arrow, or Arrow should I say, is a bit like Batman Begins. It really is a great forging of this character, but as we go on with Oliver, it becomes lighter and a more evolved character. It's just that it happens a little bit more quicker. And with a series, it's easier because you have a summer break and you come back, right? With a movie, you have to wait a year or so, or 2 years or so. It's difficult. So people just didn't see or understand what Snyder was attempting to do. It's a great shame. So now we have this DCEU problem. So they decided to reboot the whole situation, which is, at first, for me anyway, very, very exciting. But then you wonder, how can that work? How can you reboot something with such a bad reputation from the mainstream audience? But it turns out, maybe, probably. Think about this for a minute. How about if it turns out that Black Adam, Shazam! Fury of the Gods, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and the Flash movie are some of the best movies ever made in the comic book live action genre. And the upcoming production of Blue Beetle makes Blue Beetle a great movie as well. And Batgirl is a great Bat family movie. Imagine that. And what's taken all this down isn't the quality of the brand new content, it's a meltdown of one actor. And this is what lies with the problem. The problem when you allow someone like Snyder to do everything. Because Snyder got his castings bang on. But there was always a little bit of murmurings from the Flash fans saying that Ezra Miller maybe wasn't the guy to play the Flash. No issue with him. And it is interesting with Ezra. Even on Justice League, he didn't act out, he didn't melt down. And if he was going to melt down, he would have melted down on that toxic production. Zack Snyder had no issues with him, because Zack Snyder's a bit like Sir Alex Ferguson, the former Manchester United iconic legendary football manager. He knew who to shout at, who to intimidate, and who to put an arm around the shoulder with. And Ezra is an arm around the shoulder guy. So then we have to ask questions of the Flash production. What happened on that production for Ezra to allegedly melt down and then to go to the extremes that he has? And maybe he's broken mentally. I said it yesterday in my video that I believe forcing Ezra to do Fantastic Beasts 3 and the Flash movie back to back was a huge mistake. A huge mistake. And I think maybe that's where the breakdown comes from. But we do have to ask questions of Andy Muschietti on what kind of production does this to a young actor. That, I suspect, we'll never know. So, the whole point of today's DCEU Daily was to show you how a cohesive, good franchise works, opposed to one that doesn't really explain its narrative. So the question must be now, do we carry on with the DCEU? And I suspect they are. They're going to go ahead with their plans, unless Zaslav and Discovery do something dramatic in the next few weeks, and we'll have to wait and see. So let's just say the unlikely happens and they don't release The Flash next year and all these other movies. Again, very unlikely. What do we do? Do we start again? I've spoken about starting again. I would have done it after Justice League. But there's another thing you can do here, which you lot are not going to like. If you just want to bin the DCEU, you spin off the Arrowverse television franchise into a movie franchise. It's all there. Superman and Lois is killing it. One of the best live action Superman adaptations ever. It works. You've got Legends of Tomorrow. You've got all the other shows that work for certain pieces of the audience. And you can even, bring back Black Lightning for those movies, because Black Lightning is kind of a very popular character in the annuals of DC Comics. He's got a big history there. Just ask his fans. So that would be very easy to do. Like you could spin off a Matt Reeves' The Batman universe into HBO Max streaming, as they're allegedly going to do, because you never know with WB what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. You can do it. You can do the polar opposite of that with Arrowverse. Just spin it into a film franchise and it would work. Arrowverse has all the tools that the mainstream audience like. It's very similar to the MCU. I believe transferring Arrowverse into a film universe is a viable idea and very easy to do. So when fools do this big article saying how it would be stupid to replace Ezra Miller with Grant Gustin, well, there's an easy way of doing that. You replace the entirety of the Arrowverse TV franchise with the DC. So basically, you get rid of the DCEU and you bring Arrowverse and you spin it off into a movie franchise. That's how you do it. This Arrowverse is an already established franchise and it works for a lot of people. And pulling it into theatres as a mainstream movie franchise brings more eyes, mainstream eyes, more DC fans. I think it's a more palatable version of DC live action because, as I've always said, even though the DCEU has fabulous movies, more good movies than bad movies, as a franchise, it simply doesn't work. So there's your choices. Flip over the Arrowverse into a movie universe or continue with this multiverse strategy. As I say, this multiverse strategy may be really successful. They may be able to make it into a great connective universe when we start seeing these movies. What do I think is actually going to happen? I think they're just going to delay things till next year for the Flash movie that changes everything. But it does ask the question, if Shazam, and I don't know, but if Shazam and Black Adam are set after Flash, how do you explain that to the audience? And you could be creating another mess. The truth of the matter is, moving the Flash, and I understand why they moved it because of the Ezra Miller situation, has caused even more problems. We will see what they do. But there are certainly options for them if they decide to end the DCEU forever. Do I believe the DCEU is something worth fighting for? Yes, I do. I am invested in the DCEU. I do like the DCEU. But it seems to me every time they dig themselves out of one hole, they dig another hole for themselves. This has been the DCEU Daily with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection. And I'll see you again later. Until we see each other again. Goodbye. Au revoir. Auf Wiedersehen. See you later.